We shall now start with our fourth session. We have on our expert panel, Dr. Tulsi Raj. Has he joined in? He should join in. I'm going to introduce him, however, the Executive Director of Lions Arvind Institute of Community Ophthalmology, as well as the Director Operations of Arvind Eye Care Systems. Is one such personality who can actually teach you scores of issues on management sustainability and its constant revitalizing agenda. I do hope he joins us soon. We have, I'm not clear whether Dr. Ajay Sharma has joined in. Yes, there is some problem about getting the links, it appears. We have with us Dr. Ajay Sharma, who's going to be joining us soon, who's a leading beacon of the IQ chain of hospitals, a huge presence with top-notch centers of excellence in the north. Dr. Sendil Tamilarsan is another leading light in the present-day settings for scores of ophthalmologists in operational excellence. And I have Dr. Srinivas Joshi, who's going to be joining me soon, and Satyajit Sinha, who are both member ARC South and member ARC East, both individuals of great reckoning. We shall now go on to Dr. Arvind, who's going to be elaborating to us. Just 1 minute, Dr. Arvind. Today, in spite of family commitments, in spite of a tragedy which occurred in his family, I'm so touched that he's with us. He's practically a management guru for the Arvind Eye Care Systems. And to hear from him today, I think all of us are extremely enlightened. So let's hear from you, your pearls, about your amazing talk. I'm so touched that he's with us. He's practically a management guru. What is happening? Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Chitra.
Yes.
Thank you all. Nice to see you all in this virtual AOS. As my slides, all my slides are visible.
Yes.
Yes. So the topic given to me was how do you build a management team? How do we select and optimize the outcome for an organization that wants to reach out to a larger group of people? So what are the objectives of a management team? What do we expect out of a management team? I'm not talking about the founder or the head of the organization, but overall people, the next step, people who are below him or reporting to him. So the main role would be to execute and monitor strategy, planning, organizing, leading and controlling, manage day-to-day operations, involve with crisis management, and ensure that the integrity and the value of the organization is kept alive. The qualities that we expect are loyalty, trust, integrity, be enterprising, and also have patience with when dealing with problems and dealing with opportunities. So how do we build an organization? A lot of times, when we look at an organization, we have all seen organizations that have grown very rapidly. And we have all seen organizations that have stayed for thousands of years. A temple has stayed for thousands of years, a mosque has stayed, a church has stayed. So how do these organizations differ? So if you really look at a macro level, organizations have three levels of infrastructure. One is the physical infrastructure, intellectual infrastructure, emotional infrastructure. So this is how organizations are built. When somebody enters a hospital for the first time, we look at the physical infrastructure. Wow, it looks nice. It's very well laid out. It's all full of marble, granite. It looks nice, fancy. And then you go and say, oh, the doctors are good. The intellectual infrastructure is good. They have good equipment. They have good technology. They are up to date. They have a good EMR. But very seldom we go into the emotional infrastructure. Very seldom we look beyond that when we look at an organization. So what does it take to build the emotional infrastructure? So my approach to this topic is, unless you have a strong emotional infrastructure, you won't have a strong management team. You won't have a team that is able to fulfill your objectives in the longer run. And this is not a race which is run for one generation. How do you run for multiple generations? How do you sustain an organization for multiple generations? So if it comes to physical infrastructure, the cost to build is relatively high. There is a money that you spend. Time to build is low. If you really look at a 40-year, 50-year-old horizon, you may take about a year or a year and a half or even 6 months to build an infrastructure. Difficulty build is low. I was just doing a math. The entire eye care infrastructure in this country won't be more than $5-6 billion. About 30,000 crores may be the entire eye care. I'm saying about 2,000 eye hospitals each hospital worth about 10 crores or 15 crores, 30,000 crores. So that will be maybe one oil refinery that Ambani puts will be 40, 50,000 crore infrastructure. So ability to imitate is very less. Tata can easily imitate us. The entire country's eye care need if it's only physical infrastructure. Source of formidable competitive advantage, definitely. There is some competitive advantage if you are really located in a good location, good connectivity, but it's low in the longer run. A good reputation will get people. People travel all the way to Tirupati, to the temple. People travel to a doctor, to a very small place. And there are also other types of advantages that one has to be conscious about. And intellectual infrastructure, high with no emotional infrastructure, the doctors, time to build is high. And difficulty to build is high. You can't get good doctors. You want them to be with you for a while. So all that definitely does take a little while. And source of formidable competitive advantage is high. You have a good doctor, good surgeon, a good clinician with good manners, and then you can go a long way with that. But the emotional infrastructure that we are talking, which I am focusing on, is cost to build is relatively low, but it's very incremental. It's like building your emotional infrastructure in the family. It is low, but every day you do it for 20 years or 15 years. Time to build is relatively high. It's a long-term process, and difficulty to build is also high because you have to be consistent in building this. You can't build it very quickly in one day, and you can't behave differently in another day. And ability to imitate is very different. How do you, each one of the organizations that we all represent has a different culture. Very difficult to imitate. Buildings are easy to imitate. Doctors are easy. In fact, we can take one doctor from one organization to the other. Where people keep moving. So that's not very difficult. And as a competitive advantage, it's relatively higher. So how about Arvind? When I'm using Arvind as an example for how did Dr. Venkataswamy, who is the founder, created that emotional infrastructure? One, he was driven by a strong vision. The vision was to eliminate needless blindness, high volume, high quality, compassionate eye care to all. So in that vision, if he did not have that vision, Aurolab wouldn't have come. If it was a vision for eye hospitals alone, LAICO wouldn't have come because LAICO is purely encouraging competition. Arvind Medical Research Foundation wouldn't have come. So I just want to put that kind of a larger vision becomes very important if you really want to sustain beyond generations to be able to meaningfully impact a problem. Dr. V's vision was to impact a problem, not to build an organization. So they are two different elements when you really look at it. The guiding philosophy is from Sri Aurobindo. Most of you would know that. The name Arvind comes from Sri Aurobindo. So according to Sri Aurobindo, the quote is very clear. If work is approached from a spiritual perspective, it becomes divine work. And that's what Dr. V really did all through his life. He said, I'm a tool. How do I become a better tool in the hands of the divine? And I would believe it. A man who is retired at the age of 58, to do what he did in his lifetime and what is continuing. And as the line says, you will accomplish things far greater than you might have imagined. I think that's something which all of us have experienced. And that's true for great organizations. I'm not talking it's only for Arvind. Many organizations have done this, and phenomenal leaders are around. And Arvind's guiding values were compassionate and dignity, equity, transparency, and sharing. And this is another point I just want to reiterate. It also goes beyond return on investment, return on equity. Where do you get the source of funding? All that are tools to accomplish a larger purpose, but they are not the larger purpose. So that's the point I wanted to reiterate. And how does it translate into work? Eye care to all, you standardize services, you be transparent, be affordable, and be accountable. Now, whom are you accountable for? Why are you keeping your charges low? Why are you doing what you're doing in spite of the possibility of increasing the charges? It is about being accountable. If you are able to manage your organization, nobody can put a gun on your head and say, you have to buy this car or you have to buy this house. It's up to you. You may have more money, but you choose what you want to do. Same thing with the charges. It is your choice that what you want to charge and what you don't want to. How did Dr. V build the organization? Owning the problem. I think it attracts people very differently. He owned the problem of blindness. How does one own a problem of such magnitude? We own organizations. This is my hospital. This is their hospital. This is my chain. This is their chain. This is the institution. But how do you own the problem of the community? Then you think very differently. Then your scale is very different. It can be even a subset of a community. I'm going to cater to the upper middle class. I'm going to cater to the middle class. I'm going to cater to the lower middle class. I'm going to cater to the poor. So in Arvind, it said cater to all. Maybe we cater to the bottom 60% of the population, not the top 40% of the population. You have to be far-sighted. For building an emotional infrastructure, a good organization, you have to be far-sighted. You have to run a marathon. You can't run a 100 meters race. If someone else is running fast, let them run. It's their race. Why do we want to follow them? I think it is a very important paradigm to reflect upon. And not everyone needs to grow. I heard in the previous discussion that growth is essential. It is. My mother is a great cook. Should she start a restaurant tomorrow? Should she start a chain of restaurants? She enjoys cooking with the family. So I think we have to get this paradigm right. Some people are entrepreneurial. They are built that way. And some people are not. There is nothing wrong with that. I think it is very important to distinguish. Many people who work for organizations are people who tend to be happy with a safe ecosystem. I don't want to be entrepreneurial. I want to do my work. I want to be responsible. They contribute equally well. It's not that they don't contribute. So each one of us have to pick up and choose what is the focus that we want to have and do the best out there. And be a selfless service provider and leading by example. Any of the founders, I know many people leaders are here in this forum. All of them work very hard. I'm sure many people talk about work-life balance. I can assure you, most of them put work before family. I mean, I'm just not because they're just passionate about this work. They want to reach out more. They want to become better than what they are, and they want to give their best to this world. Definitely, there is a compromise that happens. I'm sure that can't be done away with. And leading by example, simple lifestyle, and sharing and building individual capacity. What I mean by simple lifestyle is, there is explicit wealth, there is implicit wealth. Explicit wealth is what you show outside, a car, a home. So one has to be very conscious about what is the explicit wealth you show. Implicit you can have. Warren Buffett drives a 15-year-old car. Doesn't mean that he is poor. So I think it is very important in an organizational setting because people are around you. People are watching you all the time. So who's the stakeholder that you want to be with? Is it your internal stakeholders who look at you or outside stakeholders who want to say that, oh, he's successful because he is showing that kind of explicit wealth? The core values of Arvind are few: quality and continuous improvement, patient centricity or compassion, self-reliance, frugality, sharing, staff centricity. And we have consciously decided it is not going to be any monetary value. It is not going to be return on investment. It is not going to be the scale of our operations from a monetary term. So that is a conscious decision we as an organization. That doesn't mean that we are not looking at it. For us, it is a means to an end, that's not an end by itself. And also coming to recruiting for values and culture are very important. I'm sure all of us have learned enough of this, right? You can't recruit a very sharp, very smart young person or a mid-career person who doesn't fit into the culture. It becomes a nightmare. The great surgeon becomes a nightmare to handle. The great manager becomes a nightmare to handle. So we also realize we need to have a culture, and for the right culture, right fit, it works out reasonably well. A strong company culture motivates employees because culture gives a consistency. I belong to this team. Everybody behaves this way. This is how I am treated, and it's consistent. I like the way I'm getting treated. I'm not saying one organization is better than the other. Some people like one kind of a culture. Another person likes another kind of a culture. Whichever it is important to keep it consistent, and transparent. So I just want to give this as a concluding slide for this discussion, which is purpose is very important. If you want to build an emotional infrastructure, why we do what we do, we have to be very consistent about it. You can't keep changing, because someone else is getting a much larger equity infusion. That should not change the purpose for why we do. Otherwise, you can't compound growth, And values is the quality we embody. Again, it has to be consistent. And culture is how we work together. The other important point, I know many young leaders are here watching this. Question to ask is, are you worthy of leadership? Many a times we ask, the followers are not important. The leader is more important. If the leader is right, the followers show up. That's why they are called followers. Somebody is leading the way. Somebody is walking behind them. Are you worthy of somebody walking behind you? Am I leading for my own gain or for the good for the shared purpose? Am I an accidental leader? Ask me, I'm an accidental leader. I'm born in the family, I'm a leader. Have I earned this position? Will I live up to the expectation of my organization? That's another question. Especially for the second generation of the people. Please remember, most of the second generation is accidental leadership. So you legitimize your leadership. It takes time. It may take a decade. It may take more than a decade, but don't take it for granted. That's the point I'm making. Am I leading by example? How does my leadership help others be the best they can be? And again, a quick slide on leadership journey. As an individual, how do you behave? How do you become worthy of a leader? Are you individually following all these things? Punctuality, self-awareness, grooming, simple things, but showing up on time is very important. Team member, are you trustworthy? Can you work with others? Can you respect others? Be respectable. And as a leader, be accountable, assume responsibility, inspire and lead others, nurture people, communicate well. I'm sure all of you know this, but do you practice it consistently? There is a good day when you practice it, a bad day you don't. But that is the point I'm trying to make. Be consistent in what you practice. I'm sure all of you have seen this Maslow's hierarchy. Great organizations are built by people in the green who have a strong self-esteem. Successful businessmen are there. They have recognition, they have strength, freedom. Statesmen are in the blue, self-actualization. You remember a Mahatma Gandhi, you remember even an ICARE, a G.N. Rao, Badrinath, Dr. Venkateswamy, all of them are, I would say, statesmen. They have built organizations. What is there for them? I don't know what is there for Dr. Badrinath. I don't know what is there for G.N. Rao. It's purely desire to do something which is much larger than them and much larger for the country as such. Finally, I'll conclude with this quote. Intelligence and capabilities are not enough. That is the intelligence part, right? That's the smarter part of the human being. There must be a joy of doing something beautiful. That is what will make a phenomenal organization, is my case here. Thank you.
Wonderful, Arvind. Arvind, I have to go to another session. So I'm sending you a request in the WhatsApp. I loved your PPT, even though so many leadership programs I conduct. Every time I learn from you. And again, I want to remind you, I learned walking with you in Pondicherry, and I will love to do that in Madras again.
Thank you, sir.
I'm competing with the youngsters in the Apple. What is it? What is the Think Under the Apple? So I hope to do my best. I'm not working only for the prize, but great talk, Arvind, and lots to learn. I've taken pictures, but still I would like to have your PPT.
Sure, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So nice of you, sir. Always I feel you, I see you encouraging all of us, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Arvind, for an amazing talk. So you have to stay a bit with us. I have some questions for you, and I'm going to ask them to Dr. Tulsi Raj. Doctor, I know your particular system has a way of going about it, but some of these questions I had actually kept for some of the other expert panel to talk on, but in somehow they couldn't get a link here. Do you believe that homegrown talent is good enough, or would you want newer talent to be brought in because they may end up bringing in newer thoughts to the system? That's one question. The other question is, would you feel that it suffices if the top man in the management alone is from the best of places and he would steer the middle level group without they coming out of highly qualified centers by having knowledge driven schedules and training programs, or in that matter? Answer to both these questions, Dr. Tulsi Raj and Dr. Arvind.
Yes, thank you, Chitra, for that question. Hope I'm audible.
Yes, very clear.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so in some sense, I think the answer would be yes for both. In the sense, homegrown versus lateral entry. I think the key question is alignment to the organization and the fit. I think there are two parts. One is the competency and capability part. Can they deliver what they have, what they're competent about? And the other one is, do they become part of the team and grow with the organization? So regardless of lateral or homegrown, I think those will be the conditions that we'll need to fulfill. And with homegrown, you have less of a risk because you kind of know the individual or whoever. No? So that's for the first part. And for the second part, in the sense, if it's a good leader, if they come from, so leadership is very different from clinical competence. I think it's much more, I would say, it's a lot more about managing people when it comes to eye care, because we are a service sector where all care is delivered by people, even though we may use sophisticated equipment, they're also used by people. So ultimately, it is managing people which becomes critical. So I think having good training, good competence, good caliber, combined with good people skills, because a good leader can get things done only by developing his or her own team and people. So if the leader recognizes that, then the answer is yes. But if the leader doesn't recognize it and then feels that he can throw around orders, and then I think at some point they will not be able to, they will fail and they may not be able to grow. Yeah.
No, the question is, like, Dr. Arvind did go to one of those top centers to get the full understanding of management. Like many of us in our generation have evolved with getting trained in our own center, and maybe some of our pearls of wisdom has helped us all through. But the kind of training which comes in these management centers and having those people into your setup, you have to definitely pay them a lot more. But that would bring a very big difference in the kind of the stature or your policy of your hospital. So what would your thoughts be?
Yeah, I think it helps to some extent, and depends so much on the individual, to bring that in. Certainly, going to a good management school, you can get good perspectives, when you're faced with a situation. I think it's all about how you think about a problem or a situation, and I think those training definitely does help. Very much like good clinical education helps you to diagnose a patient better. So same way, it definitely it helps. But I think what is critical is how is that competence used on the ground with the organization, which is where the fit becomes very critical. Otherwise, you may have some short-term gains, and sometimes we've had examples of such people coming and doing some damage to the organization. We had to let them go.
Yes.
So I think one has to be careful about that. Yeah.
And how do you deal with attrition? Because we are talking about building a management team, and so there is an attrition because the younger generation is very particular about seeing the growth there or moving on. So what is your mantra to hold them back? Giving them the job satisfaction, or is it only related to salary all the time?
Yeah, so to deal with attrition, you got to work in two ways. And one is what the word that you used, holding them back. And I think salary doesn't work. I can tell you that it will work momentarily, till somebody else offers them something better. So giving them a joy in what they do, job satisfaction, more than even recognition, I would say. Recognition also is short-lived. So sense of achievement, those kind of things help a lot. And equally, our mindset should not be to somehow hold on to everyone. It won't help the organization. You also want to create a pipeline, because people will leave, people will die, people will exit. So you can't become, you can't be unprepared. So you really want to be building your pipeline. If it is management, your second line within the organization. So that is very, very critical. If you're a large organization, the scale can help. Or putting in some formal training program, induction program. Yeah, so I think it is both, creating a kind of engagement and a love for the work will let people stay on. This is true of every organization. Now, any high-performing organization does not retain people with money. Money will be competitive. It necessarily won't be the top of the industry.
Dr. Arvind, would you want to add something to it?
Most of the points were covered. I think what is important is to build, another important factor is retention. It also depends on the culture and the locality you are from, right? Imagine if you are from, say, Madurai or Coimbatore, or local people will stay for long, and you may not get somebody. So bright ideas are all about ideas. Execution is a long-term game. So people with you who have been with you for long term, who are ordinary people, can do extraordinary things because they are supermen or superwomen in your ecosystem.
Yes, true.
They may not have an IIM or whatever degrees, but I think those are people we have to honor and recognize rather than go behind those bright butterflies who may come and stay for a while and move on.
Yes.
I have nothing against them.
No,
But other important aspect, final point I want to make is it's also about the adequacy of leadership.
Yes.
A lot of times leadership is inadequate. They get, if it is somebody who is very competent, leadership starts getting very defensive. So adequacy of leadership is very important.
Arvind sir, I have one quick question to you.
Yes.
You can take it as a personal question also. See, you told about the second generation being an ophthalmologist, third generation being an ophthalmologist, and some can be an accidental leaders. And of course, you are not of that kind. You look like a born leader. But there are certain situations where you can see the lawyer's son becomes lawyers, politician's sons become politicians, and ophthalmologist's sons becomes ophthalmologists. So how do you juggle? Is it like it is forced to you, and then we have to take up both leadership position as well as the clinical practice? And sometimes we might end up like whether I'm a jack of all and is a master of none. Because one thing I heard in 2016-17 in Vision 2020 program where IIM Indore person has addressed it. He said, see, the person who is what is trained for has to do that. If he is trained at SSLC, is doing a clerk, he has to be a clerk. You can't go and become a clerk. If a person is done an MBA and he has to do administration, he has to do that, not the clinician. That was his point of view. But how will you juggle between these kind of leadership positions as well as clinical practice? How do you try to balance both?
I'll try my approach. I'll share my approach. I think one thing the reason I said you're an accidental leader, anybody in that, just to put that onus on them. Don't take it for granted. Don't walk with the silver spoon or anything. Earn your space, earn your place. So that's what I meant. And you can only earn it as a doctor by being a good clinician. How do you get recognized? You can't say I'm the boss. So who does the surgery? It's good to be a good clinician. It helps you. If you're a good clinician, you become a role model. And that's the trajectory in healthcare, right? You have to be a good clinician and then you become, and look at all the large eye hospitals. Why was it not built by the MBAs of the world who are good at what they did? Why is Dr. Venkateswamy building? Why is Dr. Badrinath running the large organization? Or Dr. Jeevan Rao? So it's the passion and purpose for which it comes. It's not the degree. I wish somebody had told Dhirubhai Ambani to get an MBA. His son's got an MBA. He was not an MBA. So I don't think degree should influence our thinking, which is the question that Dr. Chitra also asked and which you answered. It's good to have a degree, but many people go to Harvard. They all don't become great business leaders. So many of them are mediocre or even less than mediocre. So that's the point I wanted to make. That don't take it for granted as a second generation inheritor.
Yes. Thank you very much for very valuable outputs. Thanks a lot, Dr.
I'm going to excuse myself due to some.
Yes, I know. Yes.
Coming to
we have, yes, Dr. Tulsiraj, you stay with us.
No.
Ravindran sir wanted to say something, madam.
No, Chitra, coming to your question, being a hospital, our core services is clinical.
Yes.
So clinical is one area. It's better not to bring outside leadership.
Yes.
It's always better to groom them inside.
Yes.
But at the same time, as you grow, your finance will become bigger, your IT will become bigger, your maintenance will become bigger. So many other areas also will become bigger, and who had joined you as a small organization may not have the capacity to manage.
Yes.
True. So it's always better to bring people from outside in that area.
Yes.
I think, Chitra madam, we agree that the Arvind Eye Care system, as you talked about the attrition rate, they don't have it because they look at it like a holistic kind of thing. It's not just the salary or the money we earn, which unfortunately has become in most of the metro cities and most of these business chains of the other hospitals. So probably because of the holistic approach they give, I think that is one thing where people are sticking on.
I think people would stick on in most organizations if they are given the adequate job satisfaction and a sense of belonging. That is one feature, of course, along with good remuneration. So, but we could go on and on about this. So we shall, however, go on to our next speaker, Dr. Kaushik Murli, who is the technical head of the Shankara Eye Hospital, Bangalore, and who also coordinates with the medical quality strategies of the entire Shankara Eye Care Institutions, India, one of the premier community eye care organizations of the country. And his talk is going to be I think we have to mute. Kindly, everybody has to be muted. His talk is going to be my inventory management tips for optimal resource management. On to you, Dr. Kaushik.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chitra, for inviting me to be part of this session.
Dr. Kaushik, just one
I
minute.
hope, Yes,
This room hall coordinator, please ensure that everybody is on mute. It was very disturbing when Dr. Gullapalli Rao was talking too. Yes, thank you. Thank you. You can start.
thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here to share some of our learnings at Shankara in terms of inventory management. It was again very interesting to hear the previous talk. So what I have attempted probably aligns to that, saying that we inherently do certain activities because we think it is right. And actually, when you look at it from a management standpoint or a management education standpoint, somebody has given it a very fancy term. So during my talk, I'll walk you through some of the principles of inventory management that most of us are probably doing it in some form. That should give you the confidence that you're on the right track, or give you certain insights into what you could adopt in your practice, irrespective of the scale of activity that you do. So from an inventory standpoint, ideally, you would like to run your hospital where you have all the right products that are available to you at the time that you want it. Of course, you don't want to have surplus inventory of stuff. So you don't want to start a surgery and suddenly realize a consumable to do it. Neither do you want to be in your optical shop where you have a patient who can afford to buy a progressive glass and you suddenly are not able to fulfill his requirement. So this is kind of an ideal situation that each one of us would aspire to be at. So today at Shankara, we are a network of 12 hospitals that span the length and breadth of the country, and each one of our hospitals is quite large. But that is why we are today 4 decades into eye care. As an organization, I think this is something I will again reiterate from what Dr. Arvind said. You need to be very clear about your roots as well as your purpose. As an organization, Dr. Ramani and Dr. Radha started Shankara, where 5 of their friends got together, and the first savings deposit that was put was 5 rupees. Until date, our purpose is, again, almost echoing what Arvind does, is to eliminate needless blindness. And we do it in a unique model where 80% of our surgical services we provide free of cost through a proactive door-to-door outreach. So that is our DNA, and we don't want to change that. Having said that, we need to make sure that we are sustaining our operations. For that, inventory becomes a very critical key. So the first concept that I would like to share is something that comes out of the manufacturing world that is called as the Kanban system. This is defined as a demand pull system. What do I mean by that? Each operation produces only what is necessary to satisfy the demand of the succeeding operation. So if there is a multi-step procedure that we do, you only have inventory or you roll over inventory that is required for the next activity. This is also sometimes referred to as the just-in-time kind of a system. It kind of straddles a little bit of both, where you're looking at low-cost, high-quality, on-time production. Now, this is okay in a manufacturing world where you're running a machine line, you know what you want to produce, you can switch on and switch off machines. In a hospital, is it even realistically possible? There are certain areas where we could implement this, but for this, your schedule has to be pakka. So one place where just-in-time can actually work is probably our operation theater, because you have pre-scheduled surgeries, you know exactly when you're going to do it. So that way, your final assembly or your prediction of what is going to happen, you have a plan of what consumables you could require. That is almost sacrosanct. You need to be very clear about the quality of materials that you use, because one bad batch is going to completely disrupt your services. So it is very critical for you, irrespective of again scale of operations, to be clear about the vendors that you want to patronize. A lot of us inherit practices from our mentors, but you should do that due diligence and that little extra step to identify where the inventory is coming from. And third, just-in-time can only work where there is very little fluctuation. So anything more than a 10% fluctuation is not really going to work. So parts of India see almost a 40% drop in outpatient and eye care requirement for almost about 4 to 5 months in a year. So in that kind of a situation, a just-in-time kind of an operation is just not going to work for you. The second concept that I would like to share, and again, this is something that we've seen in every one of our households, in the way the kitchen is arranged. It is called as a 5S system. It has fancy Japanese terminology, but to put it in plain English, it essentially means, have you sorted stuff to reduce clutter? So something that we have done proactively at Shankara is we've reduced our drug formulary so that for every particular product, we have only 2 or at best 3 variants. You cannot be wedded to one person. You need to have a backup. At the same time, having multiple kind of units does not help you at all. So one, reduce the clutter that you have. Second, you have to set an order. Again, a simple example out of a pharmacy. Usually you will have multiple batches that are delivered to you. So one batch can be kept outside. The next batch, you can keep it in a small box. As soon as the first batch gets over, you take it out and keep it on top. And typically in a pharmacy, you follow what is called as a first in, first out kind of a situation. Another trick for most of you small practitioners who are starting off, towards the end of a quarter or end of a financial year, typically you will have the pharma companies coming up with you with offers of short expiry drugs. Again, pick up stuff that you require. Don't over pick up inventory just because somebody is giving it to you at a discount. This has to follow a last in, first out kind of a situation. Third, where you store your inventory is very, very critical. The humidity should be controlled. Preferably, it should be air conditioned so that the life of your inventory is much more. We've often seen situations where stationaries have got completely wiped out because of fungus, and you end up spending a lot of your item. The third aspect that you need to do is you need to categorize your complete inventory into A, B, C. What does this mean? A is high value, possibly sometimes high volume. And then it kind of goes into B and C. So I've just taken an inventory of one of our hospitals where out of 160 items, about 21 items categorized as category A, 27 as category B, and there are 117 that are category, 112 that are category C. By just controlling A and B, 95% of the value can be controlled. So you need to pick the battles that you want to fight and not try and control everything else. To sustain this, you need to get into contracts. So you need to negotiate where your prices are fixed for at least 1 year, identify vendors so that they are also confident that you will patronize them and they will deliver it to you on time. Measurement is critical. As ophthalmologists, we are very, very obsessed with recording visual acuity. Similarly, you need to measure whatever inventory you have. You don't need fancy systems. A simple Excel spreadsheet can help you. But again, look at data over a 2 to 3 year horizon, or at least start building up data if you're starting a practice. This will help you in identifying seasonal and cyclical demand. You need to arrive at what is called as a reorder level. A simple thumb rule I've again taken for a BSS kind of a situation where you know that it is going to take you 4 days to order for the vendor to deliver to you. Your order cycle that you're typically looking at is at a 1 week kind of a time period. And you are always worried about running out of stock. So you want 7 days of stock held with you. So assuming that you're using up about 100 units a day, your reorder level will come up to 100 into 7. That is your average demand for 1 week. Your lead time of 400 units, that is for your to cover the transit time of stuff. And again, another 700 units that you're holding as your safety stock. So for each one of your large inventory items, you can arrive at what should be a minimum reorder level and trigger that automatically. You also need to understand that this metric works well where you have some control on the system. If you are in a location that is a little remote, then the time that it takes for you to procure and sell may be much more expensive than you holding inventory. So this can be a yardstick, but you cannot use it for everything else. So you need to figure out a way that your ordering costs as well as your holding costs. So when you are taking up space, imagine you were paying rent to store that item. Add that to your inventory. That is your actual cost. Add the cost for you to having to audit your stock at the end of the month. The next thing that you need to figure out is you need to optimize. Typically, we just negotiate down. You get 3 quotes. Whoever is the lowest, you give it to him. But what can help you is to do what is today even done in large multinationals is what is called as collaborative planning. So large motor companies actually give visibility to their entire inventory to the vendor, where he knows how much of stock you have, he can plan his production and supply it to you. But having this kind of a long-term relationship with the vendor is very, very useful. They will also oblige you in terms of your requirement. So don't be shy about sharing your information. They will anyway get it. So as well be proactive and share so that they help you. The last bit of concept that I wanted to share with you is when you're looking at inventory, the temptation is to keep the minimum possible that you have. But here is an example where Amazon was threatened by a company that was selling diapers. Now, why should they be scared? What happened was mothers who were shopping on diaper.com started slowly buying other products from them. So in the short term, there was opportunity that was lost. So there was a sale that was lost. There was a perception that was being built that Amazon never had what mothers wanted. And this negative experience can then impact your customers. So they then walk away from your platform or your organization saying there's no point going there anyway, they are not able to solve my problem. So while you're looking at inventory costs, while you're looking at financing, while you're looking at saying that, okay, how much of it is getting damaged, you want to control that. You also need to balance it out against what we call as lost sale. So if I had this product and there's a customer who wanted it, how much have I lost out? So end of the month, you need to measure that out and see how much of revenue you have lost because of you not having this particular inventory. And also how is it impacting your reputation in the market? So that is extremely critical. So what does Amazon do? When you Google up or when you look up Amazon for a white shirt, they give you multiple options. So that is something that we need to learn, saying that you need to build options across various category groups. I'll give you an example from about how we stock our opticals. So when a person walks into the optical, there are two options. One, he may walk in saying, I want a Tommy Hilfiger. In which case you should have about 3 or 4 options to show him that he can pick a frame of. But if somebody walks in saying, I want a rimless glass, there is no point in you stocking 4 or 5 Tommy Hilfigers. It is better and more prudent for you to have an array that could range from a Nike to a Vogue to a Tommy Hilfiger to a very low cost brand like an Inspire, so that based on the model that they can afford, they can actually buy it. So it is very critical when you're planning your operations that you're not reacting to what a customer wants, but you shape his demand. So you show him stuff that you have and allow him to choose from that. The last caveat that we have learned as an organization is the temptation when you're buying capital equipment is to bundle. Please be very careful because your ability to negotiate goes. So you're stuck with that product for about 3 to 5 years. It will be something equivalent of being in a very unhappy marriage. So as far as possible, de-link your capital costs from your operating costs, because somewhere that cost is hidden and it's going to hit you somewhere else. The workaround is to have what we would typically refer to in ophthalmology as a library stock, where they stock some of the material with you. This is a fancy management terminology called drop shipping, where you order a product and somebody delivers it to the customer. This is something that can work very well when you're dealing with contact lenses. So you can have a very small inventory of trial lenses. The final powered lens can be actually sent by the vendor, shipped directly to the customer. So you don't even need to bring it into your inventory. So you just pay the vendor and he ships it. So you need to pick some of these models. A lot of us do this intuitively. A lot of it, like I shared with you, has some management background. So it's good to know. So the information that you have, how you connect the dots and build your knowledge is extremely critical, because a lack of knowledge is something which will come and bite you back much later and becomes very, very critical and expensive in the long run. So once again, I thank Dr. Chitra and the ARC for inviting me for being a part of this session. Back to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Kaushik. It was a wonderful talk. Thank you so much. One quick question to you. So you said that you have around 12 branches. So when you do the purchase, is it better to have a centralized purchase and then send it to the other branches? Or there might be some good managers in some other branches who might get a better deal than the person who is doing in the central place. So how do you try to do these purchase kind of things whenever it comes to stocking up your inventory?
So, Dr. Srinivas, like I mentioned, we have a category A, B, C, and there are certain things that are sacrosanct. where you cannot look at saving a rupee. So OT consumables is something we are very finicky about. So there we have a standard approved list. Similarly with our equipments. So we have a standard set of vendors because it just makes it much easier for us from servicing, from spares and all of it. So again, for those of you looking at setting up small practices with multiple chambers, it makes sense for you to use one type of slit lamp. It makes sense for you to look at multiple types of the same operating microscope. So that builds in efficiency into the system. So for certain consumables which are non-negotiable in terms of the quality and the brand, we fix that and we don't allow the unit to deviate. So our ERP system today does not allow them to order anything beyond that. For category C items, they are free to order. Some of our products, again, they are able to negotiate better. So we go back to that vendor and negotiate it down, saying that, look, you're supplying it to me in Guntur at such a rate. Why are you not giving it to me elsewhere? But typically when it's a rate contract across the country, the vendor is also much more obliging because there's a much larger volume that is available.
So you use different.
Like I said, we allow 2 or 3 products that they can pick from.
So you use a different software to do this. Like I was learned that you use the Zoho software to do this management. Or is it better to have everything under one umbrella? You have the clinical, the inventory management, the finance and everything under the one software, or have the big pieces of these softwares and try to juggle with them?
So honestly, I don't think there is a single solution for it. So we've recently migrated to Oracle NetSuite because of our operations required us to do that. Prior to that, we were using a single hospital management information system that had some aspects of inventory management built into that. Like I said, an Excel spreadsheet can be a wonderful tool for you to control inventory. You don't need something very fancy. End of the day, it is the data that you have, how you analyze the data, and how you act on the data that is critical. The ERP solutions help you in sometimes automating it in terms of reports and building dashboards so that you have a much more real-time view into it. So that would be, it depends on the scale. So any ERP solution again comes at a cost. So again, that is going to add on to your inventory cost. So you need to trade off, saying that if I'm a small practitioner having a small operation theater, it does not make sense for you to invest in a very large ERP system. But you should know what is coming in, what is going out.
Thank you, Dr. Kaushik, for those wonderful answers. Tulsi sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Any your views, your thoughts?
Just a few tips based on our experience. One is this will apply for large or small because scale gives you a bargaining power. So if you're a large organization like Shankara with 12 hospitals and a high volume of work, you have scale in that sense. But even for a smaller organization, you can negotiate based on your annual volume. Because I recollect when I first joined Aravind 40 years ago, we were very small. And initially we used to order things as needed. You wanted to print something, we'll order for that particular print. And then we would get a certain price. And then that was, we knew that we could do better. So then in a couple of years later, we estimated the annual requirements, for multiple things. If it is stationery, those days when everything was on paper, half your inventory stores was paper. So we made an annual requirement of all our printed items, forms and this and that became lakhs and lakhs worth, very attractive to many printers. So we got really extremely competitive rates, but of course, you're not buying everything for 1 year at a time. So this is our annual requirement and we want to deliver it on a monthly basis. So I think the point I'm trying to make is that you want to leverage scale. I think even a small practice, you have scale. And another point is that when it comes to lead time and things like that, and how much stock you hold and all that, today I think you can be really, really lean in stock holding. Within Aravind, I think for several items, our stock holding is in days, 5 days, 6 days, like that, because the market is very competitive. And there's certain things, if you have the volume, you can have them deliver on a daily basis and they will do it. So that is another thing which we are doing now. So we have gone from a situation where our storekeepers would constantly ask for more space to now they have adequate space because we really trimmed down the stock holding, and it's got many other benefits. And final point is that, very contrary to common belief, we actually monitor how long we take to pay the bill to the vendor. No, ideally we want to pay it immediately. The minute we have verified that stock has come in, quality is good, is as per the rate, once that is done, the payment should be made immediately. No, so we really don't delay or take credit. So that has helped us get really attractive prices. And whenever there has been some shortage, which is cyclic, something goes out of market, we always will be the preferred client. We would get what we need. So these are some of the very practical tips. The rest of it, Kaushik has covered wonderfully.
Thank you, Tulsi sir. One last question to both of you. Many ophthalmologists keep asking me, what's the software you need to use? So whether it has to cover everything together, the same question which I asked to Dr. Kaushik as well, or buy and software who are already into the ophthalmology. Like say, for example, Lakisoft is there, Notes is there, or develop your own software. Because in tier 2 or tier 3 cities, it is difficult to get such professionals. So but if we go on to these high-end softwares, they charge per patient. So they charge around 5 rupees, 10 rupees per patient. So what is your thing to most of the general ophthalmologists, not for so big institutions like yours or Shankara, but who are medium or small scale, what they need to do about these software kind of systems?
I think one caution is now almost all software is becoming real time. In the sense, like if it is EMR, you're entering data in real time. If it is stores, you are using it in real time. So which really means that your workflow has to match the logic used in the EMR or in the inventory management, whatever. So that is, I think, one point of filter or consideration that you really will need to have. So second, in terms of cost, I think to make that judgment, if you are small, probably paying per patient may not be a bad idea because you can save on investment and then you are not taxed or billed on the fluctuations of patient volumes. However, if you are on a large high scale, then you really want to take cognizance of that. And the third question of build or buy. So like in our case, we have chosen to build ourselves. We in fact looked at Oracle NetSuite, and then we're kind of not sure we're going to go in for it or not. Because with all those products, they have tremendously more capabilities than you will ever use. And then you'll end up paying for it indirectly. So we are often tempted to build on our own, like we built our own EMR and HMS and inventory, HRIS, all of it is home built. We do it for two reasons. One, we want those systems to reflect our way of working. And the second one is to kind of save costs, obviously. So this will have to be a decision made on a case-to-case basis. Yeah. On to you, Kaushik.
So we've taken the exact opposite path of picking up specialized products for various activities. So we run a separate system for our HR. We run a separate, we used to be on Tally earlier for our finance. We had a separate HMIS. We didn't have EMR for a longest time. We were on paper records. We then started scanning it to digitize medical record. Because honestly, we didn't believe that we had the complete overall expertise to look at it holistically. So our thought was take the best-in-class product, adopt what the best practices for that particular area is, and walk through it. So we started digitizing the areas that we thought were most critical. So we started from the finance, management, the hospital basic process of registration and making sure that that aspect was digitized, and slowly move to the clinical side. Often you will find that we as doctors are the last to adopt anything to do with technology, especially when it comes to EMR. So we said we'll keep the most difficult battle to the last, and that has been the path that we've honestly taken. I think Sir was spot on in saying that you can't really, it depends on your ability to, the time that you want to spend, because the downside of picking up these multiple things is they need to start talking to each other. So that interface and the data that flows from one system to the other, that has to be seamless. So if you have that passion and capability, Dr. Arvind spoke about being entrepreneurial. So say you are entrepreneurial from that standpoint of saying, okay, I want to figure out the best way of doing it, and that gives you that extra kick in life apart from the surgeries that you're doing, then that could be it. Or if there is somebody else who can play that role, you have a professional who can do that, then that becomes very useful. We have that team that can help us in consolidating and building it. Therefore, we've chosen that. But for a general ophthalmologist, I would say the most critical aspect is to have a good accounting package, because that is the most critical element. You're going to struggle for that one surgery, counsel that patient, do that surgery. And if you're going to be losing money because of bad accounting, bad inventory, then what is the point? So you need to get your priorities very, very clear first.
Very true, Kaushik sir. I think we had both the discussions, two sides of the coin, and one says you can develop your own, and other says take the best in the market and try to bridge it. It's very wonderful. You know, these kind of discussions is what our ophthalmologists need. That is what we all need it. And thank you so much, Dr. Kaushik. It was a wonderful talk. I request you to please stay on. We have one more talk and then we can have a discussion. Thank you, Tulsi sir, for your wonderful comments. Now coming to another doyen in the field of oculoplasty, who is none other than Dr. Usha Kim, madam. Madam, yeah, you can just unmute yourself and you can start your presentation. So she's the director for oculoplasty services in Arvind Eye Hospital, Madurai. And we have been listening to her talks right from our postgraduate days, lovely talks. But here she is trying to talk something out of the ophthalmological subject, that is creating a substantial work, 4 tips and tricks. Over to you, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Kaushik. And I think I've been given a very fancy title, tips and tricks. I don't have such fancy items to offer, but definitely I'll share the practices that we have at Arvind. And of course, it will be applicable for all the ophthalmologists. So the first thing I wanted to share was balancing the manpower. You should never have an excess, because there is a definite decline in the efficiency of the performers, and also there's a lack of accountability because there are too many people handling the same activity. At the same time, if you have inadequate people, you have an exhaustion and the quality offered is poor relatively, and there is an inefficiency eventually. So for us to have a good productivity out of people, you need to have a right balance. You need to have the right number. Now, for the consideration of proper manpower planning, we need to have a proper role clarity. That is, you need to categorize the people. You need to give a proper role clarity as to what they need to be performing, and also what activities needs to be performed by those individuals. Because often you give a title, but you don't give them the exact activities that need to be performing. They end up not performing, and the expectations at both ends are not met. And then you also need to analyze the performance. That is, you need to know what volume they need to be handling in order to do an appraisal later on. So you need to know the workload as well. And the most important thing as of now, what we see is really relevant is who should be performing the activity, which means a lot of tasks have to be shifted to other people. So it's just not the clinicians. It could be the clinicians, it could be the administrators, it could be the paramedical staff, and it could be the support staff. And each one needs to have a role clarity with a proper job description, and also clearly indicate to them what is expected of them, how much can be done. Now, we also need to understand what is the volume that we are tackling. It could be just about 50 to 100 patients in a day. What is it that we are going to handle? What are the activities that we are going to perform in our clinic setup or in our institution or at a hospital? It could be any grade, but we need to know. And what is the expansion that we foresee in the near future? And also anticipate an amount of attrition. You can base it on your previous experience, or you can also make some kind of an assessment, which I'll talk to you in a little while. So now you also have to match your intake based on your attrition. So intake, you need to take the right person for the right job. Now, after having an interview or having several conversations with a person, you probably would think that this is the person right for that particular job. Let me take a simple example of an MLOP. I just want to take that example because MLOPs are very critical in our system. So you would take a counselor who is very verbal, who can talk and can be a little aggressive in terms of spelling out things very clearly to the person across. So in our case, if it is a counselor, we would think of a person who is more verbal, is very good in communication. So you might have chosen that person for that particular job, but you need to spend some amount of time orienting the person, training them, and also mentoring. They cannot be super duper in day one. They have to be oriented as to what is expected of them. You have to train them in that particular aspect and then mentor them. The same holds good for all categories of staff, be it a clinician, be it an administrator, be it a paramedical staff or a support staff. All of these people require a proper orientation, a proper training, and good mentoring, hand-holding, and eventually letting them go to work independently. Now, talking about attrition, there could be an active attrition and a passive attrition. An active attrition is like one anticipated, like people are there for, like for example, if it's a doctor, a postgraduate would probably stay for a couple of years, a fellow probably a couple of years, and then in like 2 to 3 years down the line, they would be leaving us. That would be an active one. I mean, we foresee it and we let them go. Passive would be you have to let them go because they are a misfit and they're not doing adequately well. So you may have to let them go. Now, we have, as far as the doctors are concerned, we have the consultants or the medical officers and the trainees, which could be in the form of residents or fellows. The consultants would concentrate on diagnosis treatment, which is very, very crucial, complex surgeries, and most importantly, they would be engaged in training and mentoring and research activities. All of these are very relevant and pertinent, and you will have to ensure that this is an ongoing process to attract the residents or the fellows who would be initially engaged in examination, surgeries, and outreach activities. So this would be the work pattern they would be performing in the initial years. Now, you also have to balance the human resources in terms of the doctors to paramedical staff to the support staff. What we actually follow here at Aravind is 1:5:4, which is actually good enough for any setup, be it a small one or a large one. So the clinician is led to focus on the critical areas like decision making in terms of treatment, counseling to a certain extent, and surgery. The paramedics would spend more time in patient care, which could range from any activity in terms of recording the investigations to counseling the patients and also treating them whenever necessary. And the support staff would be helping us with the patient satisfaction. Now, the productivity of the staff definitely increases and improves only when there is a standardization. Each one cannot have one way of performing the activities. So we need to have protocols in place which are to be stringently evaluated and updated as and when there is an innovation or a technology or a technique that's new. Systems have to be put in place in order to ensure that there is a monitoring happening at all levels. And also, most importantly, whenever we talk about productivity of the staff, we also should ensure that there is an ideal environment that's provided for that particular staff to perform that particular activity. If it is a doctor, you need a good provide them with the right equipment, be it a microscope or a slit lamp. It should be an ideal environment that we need to support these staff. And as it goes, I think most of us require a bit of monitoring, and in order to appraise and also give a proper feedback, we need to have proper monitoring system in place. For example, if you have to monitor a MLOP, you need to know exactly what she's performing. Like say, for example, she's a refractionist. How many refractions has she performed in a day? You need to monitor that. And how many of them are right? And how many wrong prescriptions has she given? So this is a place where it allows us to give a good feedback and also provides a place for appraisal. Now, there are opportunities by monitoring to create a system wherein you could educate the performers or the MLOPs to upscale them and also to provide some kind of a continuous medical education as well. So it is very, very important for us to have a monitoring system in place for all categories of staff, which will, and also this feedback, if say a person is performing very well, providing the feedback, telling them that they're doing very well is a very good incentive for the performer. So it's very, very important for us to give that proper feedback, and a feedback can be given only when there is a monitoring system in place. Now, to manage attrition, we need to have the people align themselves towards the job, and for which we need to have an inclusiveness from the top management. It could be a manager, it could be a supervisor, it could be anybody in the system in the hierarchy. And inclusiveness helps them to be aligned to the job. You empower them. I mean, we have empowering for the MLOPs and the doctors at various levels. I think in the previous talk also, people have been posted in smaller centers to get empowered, and then they move on to larger centers where they get to move to a higher position. So all along, you will let them be empowered from a small scale to a large scale, which helps them to escalate themselves in their career. And as I mentioned earlier, create a work culture, and this culture has to be uniform, transparent, has to be flowing from top down, and create a supportive ecosystem as well. Now, the most important thing is create a transparency in their growth pattern, be it the doctors or paramedics. They need to know where exactly they're climbing on in the ladder. So when they know where they're climbing on, there is a motivation for them to work towards it. And you should have a space for them to voice out. Everybody needs a space to voice out. So we have systems like suggestion corners, where they could spell out their grievances or whatever, and space for creativity. This allows them to be innovative and also helps them to be participative in the system. So somewhere my small innovation is there, it's been approved by the organization, and it's working in all our hospitals, gives them a motivation. And the most important thing again is capitalize on the potentials of the individual and facilitate them to grow in a particular area. There are some doctors who are not happy doing surgeries. Well, they may be good in academics, they may be good in teaching, they may be good in research. Help them capitalize on those areas and allow them to grow in that particular area. But again, as I said, monitoring is very, very important, and giving them a feedback after having given them the liberty of choosing the area and working on that particular area. You need to monitor and give them a feedback. And when somebody is not fitting into our system, let them go, and that has to be graciously done. And whenever somebody wants to get out of our system, also you will have to let them go very graciously, because they might have various reasons. This is sending a kind of a, there is something that's going around in the organization. She had to go, he or she had to go, and there was such a gracious letting go of the organization. This sends a message around the organization. And also now, we need to also remember that there is something called another life to the candidate who is working at the hospital. So you'll have to engage in their performance at home also to a certain extent, and their well-being as well. You could engage them in social activities. You could create facilities where their children could come in. I have some camps for their children. All of these are activities which can be chosen based on the scale in which we practice. And of course, I put this remuneration last in the list because it really doesn't matter, as was mentioned by our Tulsiraj sir. Remuneration is not the only thing that people look for, but it has to be essentially market matched. So in summary, we need to have an adequate and appropriate distribution of manpower, delegation and task shifting for optimal productivity, standardization and process, protocols and training is very, very important. Engaged and empowered staff will remain motivated, and that's all we need to have for a proper human resource system. Thank you.
That was a wonderful talk, Usha. That was really good. And I'm very sorry I had to leave and during the Kaushik's talk because I had to participate. You have to stop sharing your screen. I had to go to the management committee meeting and I felt missing your talks was a big loss. So going on, I have some questions for you. I would want Dr. Tulsiraj and Dr. Kaushik, all of you all to answer this question. How many of them actually stay beyond their training period? And does the cycle of new recruits joining in more than compensates for those who are exiting out? I know all the most valuable lessons which you told us, Dr. Usha, but this people exiting the organization is happening. So how do you feel? Does it actually make a difference? The third question I have is, what is the male-female ratio of stability in employment? That is the third question. And do you feel that if you keep enhancing with training programs and teaching them new skill sets would keep them with you? Or is it understanding the volume of work in our hospital and the kind of fatigue which sets in by the end of the day, it all becomes very routine?
So should I take it, sir? ED, sir?
Dr. Tulsiraj.
Should I take it or would you want to answer this question, sir? You're muted, sir.
Dr. Tulsiraj, you're muted.
Yeah, Usha, you go ahead and respond. Yeah.
So for the question number one, attrition, yes, we do have a significant attrition. Overall is about 15 to 17%. It varies over the years. Now, if you talk about the doctors, you all know what the situation is. They get trained. They would stay there for a couple of years to get further trained. And as and when the new things come in, they get trained again. And there is a saturation for them. There is a plateauing of interest. And eventually they might want to move out to the hometowns. This is an anticipated attrition. And this is a welcome attrition. Now coming to the MLOPs, we have a situation wherein they work with us for about 5 to 7 years maximum. And most of them would move on in their lives because of the societal implications they have as well. So another thing I would want to emphasize here is clearly indicators. These MLOPs are particularly performing the skills, which is almost routine and monotonous, as you mentioned, Dr. Chitra was mentioning about the monotony. Yes, it sets in. Unless you give them a variety, there is some monotony set in for these candidates as well. So when they move, it's almost a welcome move. I think we would appreciate the move also. But if you have a candidate who can scale up and grow and is a good leader, we would like that candidate to continue. And we would give them a variety, change in the performance or change in the skill set that they need to provide. So they would become leaders in the form of either they would be trainers or supervisors or managers or coordinators. All of these is a possibility. For the doctors, it's a different ball game. They would have come from far off places. They would want to go back to their places. And I think, again, we are not compromising on our vision or mission. We want everybody to do their work. And if they're well trained, we're happy that they're leaving the organization after having a very good training and going places where they would be providing the same services. The same holds good for MLOPs as well.
Dr. Kaushik, you have any thoughts on these management aspects?
What Dr. Usha said, saying that at every cadre you need to identify the performers and the non-performers. The performers need to be groomed. Sometimes we may not be the best place for their career also. So you should not hold back people who may probably blossom elsewhere, because if they do well elsewhere, they will come back and do good to you as an organization. So that is one thing that we have learned over the years. The second aspect is when you're training people, we are often scared saying, oh my God, what if I train and they leave? But imagine the flip side. What if they don't leave and they are untrained? Then you have a bigger problem at hand. So today we have de-linked our training and the recruitment. So we train people, and based on the requirement at every hospital, they are welcome to recruit. And our belief is that if we have trained them well enough, our candidates should be much better than what the market offers. So we create a very competitive environment. We would love to have people from other organizations join in, because that brings in vibrancy to the organization also. Otherwise, you become too much of a single thought process entity.
Dr. Srinivas, do you have some questions? Srinivas Joshi,
Is busy.
he's busy.
He's not able to attend to, I think.
I wouldn't be surprised if poor fellow is having his lunch only now.
Just to supplement Dr.
Yes.
Chitra, what
Yes,
they
yes.
both said, I think
Yes.
attrition is inevitable. So I think what is critical is having a pipeline, which I also mentioned earlier.
Yes.
So I think that's very important. And something which Usha didn't touch upon is onboarding, or what we call as orientation. That's again extremely critical, so that you bring in upfront alignment to the organization, to the processes, and how things are happening in your own organization. So that's again very important. The third element, which again we have found to be very useful, we use the word empowerment, but it's really about respecting the employee, or more respecting their job. Like, for example, high school girl who may be in charge of our operating room, which schedules, which does the planning, because a high volume, maybe for 200 surgeries or more on a day. So she would be telling the senior most person, or even Dr. Ravi, who's the chairman, on how many surgeries he ought to be doing. So, and then that's routine. I mean, that's her job. So that's respected. So the whole hierarchy bit doesn't come in. So I think empowerment is something to do with giving respect to your staff, regardless of their status, because really respecting what they do. It's not the individual. So I think these are some things which you have to build within the organizational culture, which again, in terms acts on the employees in a very different way. So they really, I mean, that's what makes them feel empowered and also become engaged with the organization, something that you mentioned, Dr. Chitra. Yeah.
Dr. Srinivas?
I have one question to Dr. Usha Madam, Dr. Tulsi Raja, and Dr. Kaushik. Do you have any, like say, for example, for HR management, do you have any policy? See, there are so many examples, like we get a mini CEX exercise or UC Davis professionalism excerpt, all those things where you get most of the things, whether they act like a team player, they are divided, whether they are in time. So what we are doing at our institute is, I try to grade them on the Likert scale. So I've given them the UC Davis professionalism excerpt and try to slightly modify it based on that, and try to make a Likert scale and ask each observer, say for example, for floor level, take a manager who have to do that. But that manager will not be known. That means the people around them will not be knowing who is their manager, who is scoring around it. So what is the best kind of HR management system you people are implementing at Arvind as well as at Shankara?
Dr. Kaushik, would you want to go first?
So when you're looking at recruitment, again, at different levels, we follow different principles, so to speak. So at our fellowship interviews, interestingly, we have a psychologist who's part of our interview panel. So we've been doing it for the last 2 years because we realized that the DNB students and fellows actually have the most stressful time. So it is very good for you to know what their stress triggers are, what their positive, negative triggers are, and we found it to be a very good match. So we again have used multiple tools of having them write articles, having interactions, asking them about situations that sometimes they may lie, but it still works pretty well. In terms of the psychometric assessment tools that you were asking for, we used to use multiple of these tools for leadership positions, especially the unit leaders and that kind of positions, because these come at a cost, both in terms of economic cost as well as from evaluation costs. What we found to be most effective, honestly speaking, is to have 2 or 3 people to interview. Because I think what has been resonating through all the talks that we've heard is that the alignment to the culture of the organization is very, very critical. So when you have 2 or 3 people who have been part of the organization, they could be at various levels. When they interact very quickly, they can tell you saying, okay, this is somebody who can fit in or not fit in. Once you have the right attitude, the skills can always be taught. So that's something that we've learned again with time. And that's something that we're using. So we use very limited psychometric in recruitment. We use it, like I said, for a fellowship program more than for employees.
Yes, Tulsi sir and
Yeah.
Usha madam.
Yeah, very briefly, we really don't use any of the psychometry tests for assessment and things like that. But then what we have put in place are a few things. Now, when it comes to training, it's done very rigorously. And then we also have two communication channels, which is actually IT based. One is where they are at freedom to report anything wrong happening in the organization, in patient care or otherwise, including near misses. Maybe mistake didn't happen, but could have happened. And then those things get landed up instantaneously at the highest level. Chairman, myself, Dr. Usha, half a dozen people, and they get also acted upon immediately. And almost always we look for a system fix rather than a person fix. Because even if a person made a mistake, we would recognize it is probably an outcome of lack of supervision, monitoring, or training. So we would go to the root cause and fix that. So that's created a certain healthy environment. And the second is much more at the personal level, wherein there's another portal wherein they can post what we call as a suggestion corner. The breakfast was horrible, or the TV timing was not enough, whatever it is. They would do it, or too many mosquitoes, whatever it is. But then again, the reaction time to start working on them is instantaneous. And quite often there will be some resolution within the day. So just giving that confidence that their voice is heard, and something will be done. So this is set up deliberately to cut through all hierarchies to land up at the highest level instantaneously. So that I think has been very helpful in making sure that there is a sense of staff centricity, and that builds trust over time, and that's been very helpful also. And in small organizations, I think this is by default. You don't need IT systems. You just need to be sensitive to body language and whatever is there. Yeah.
And you all have patient feedback systems, sir, because what we learn from the Western field
is
Fitzpatrick evaluation. They have shown that 80% of the doctors change their behavior is because of the patient feedback.
Yeah, that's very true, Srinivas. Actually, we do it in two ways. We have actually a team of half a dozen people who do it on a regular basis. The typical questionnaire method and phone calls and things like that. And I think something innovative that we do is every day we do two focus groups. That means if it is retina service, they'll pick up 10 patients from retina who are willing. They are just more the patient's willingness to spend about half an hour with us. So they are led through a discussion asking about what went well, what we can do better, and things like that. And when this person is doing that focus group discussion, we will have a few people in the same department also sit and observe, because they have to listen to what patients feel nice about their work or their experience, and same way what they don't like about that work. And that's been extremely powerful in changing behavior. And then quite often we feed some of that into the training program. So that's been very powerful. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
And that one more addition to that point is we also do this as a routine in the departmental meeting every week. The feedback, whatever is being gathered in terms of the MLOP's performance, the doctor's performance, every individual performance is rated, and then we are also
rating this, madam. The patients or the staff?
The patients will give a feedback to our feedback team, and we will be rated and benchmark against the departments. And this will be discussed in the departmental meeting every week. So they give us a clear visibility And to the extent that the doctor was talking about something in the operation theater when he was performing, the sister came just right bang on me for syringing, things like that come out. And yeah, so those are very helpful for us because, as you said, it has changed a lot of our behavior. And now the doctors and the staff themselves have changed in their body language because they know very well that it's going to be quoted somewhere.
True, very true. And especially in the digital era, if somebody goes and puts a bad review in the Google, then the management will definitely try to bring upon that doctor. That has become so scary nowadays for the doctors.
Yeah, no, not to penalize, but more to change the behavior and indicate that this is not a practice that is being appreciated in the organization.
Great, great. Dr. Kaushik, quick 1 minute, and then we'll end up this session.
No, I think the feedback is very critical. So we have different systems. We don't do focus groups, but we do look at identifying patients who are upset. So they can trigger a response saying they're upset. That kind of gets escalated up, and we then try and talk to the patient and understand why they are upset. And again, the attempt is to figure out what the problem was. Quite often it's related to communication. The doctor meant something, said something. Most of us have something else on our mind, maybe a complication of yesterday's surgical list that has landed up that has completely upset you. So the next patient does not get a smiling face from you. And he says, oh, that doctor was so grumpy. He was so annoying. He was so angry. He didn't listen to me. He had something else on his mind. So quite often just talking to them helps them. That helps. Again, from a system fix, often we find certain errors. Sometimes it is to do with the individual. And sometimes you have to take that hard call of letting people go. So if you think that there is an issue, let them know upfront, but you have to be consistent. So the same feedback comes to 3 different doctors. You can't treat it differently saying, oh no, he'll never do such a thing or she will never do such a thing. So you have to be very consistent. So that actually helps. Like Usha ma'am said, the transparency is very, very critical. And the minute you react to that, it helps. How much of the feedback changes behavior is very difficult, but what we keep reminding our doctors is there is a 95% chance that what you're talking is getting recorded, whether you have given permission or not. So be aware of that. And once it's on social media, it's on social media. You can delete the Google review, but somebody will rake it up at some point in time. So you have to just learn to live with it and behave that somebody is videographing you and recording you. That seems to be working well for us now.
Great.
So one more point I just wanted to add, just to help the youngsters. See, you have to trust people, but at the same time, you cannot be biased to any particular person. Sometimes we have this tendency to lean on to somebody in particular because they are high performers. But then we'll have to be very careful and very balanced about it. You need to trust people. At the same time, you'll have to keep in mind that we should not have any bias towards any particular person. That happens in a smaller setup sometimes.
Madam, you are muted.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presence of Dr. Kaushik Murli, Dr. Usha, Dr. Tulsi Raj, my dear moderator Srinivas Joshi, and the excellent talk from Dr. Arvind Srinivasan were one of the highlights of today's LDP session. I don't know whether you're all aware of it. We've been doing this from 12 o'clock today, and there's been so much of discussion and so much of information transfer, and it's been a truly enlightening evening. Of course, it's going to go on from 5 to 7:30. And for a change, 3 women folk are talking. If any of you have any energy, you could definitely stay back and hear 3 of us. Myself, Namrata, and Anagha would be there. And of course, we're inducting the new leaders. And so thank you so much for your contribution. We'll always remember that. Thank you.
All the best, Chitra and team. Thank you so much for organizing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.